This is Harry John for Boxing Social in association William Hill and Empire Fight Store. I'm delighted to be joined by Dan Raphael. It's been a while, Dan, but how's things, mate?
Things are good, Harry. Appreciate you having me on as always.
Let's get straight into it. The fight that we've all been looking forward to. It's on, it's off, it's on. Garcia and Tank Davis, April 22nd, Las Vegas. How pleased are you, Dan, that this fight is over the line and finally done?
I'm thrilled. I've always been saying for the last several weeks, this is a fight that boxing fans have wanted to see for quite some time. And I know both fighters wanted this fight. And as everybody who follows the sport knows, unfortunately, sometimes just the will of the athletes is not enough to make a fight happen. It usually helps, but it's not the only thing. There's lots of business considerations. This was a particularly hard fight to make because they are with different promoters. They are with different broadcasters. There's not exactly a lot of love between them. But where there's a will, there's a way. And as aggravating as it's been for the last few weeks, they finally got the fight done. Maybe people have noticed that it won't be on April 15th, which was always the date that it was supposed to take place on. One of the things that was kind of a hurdle they had to overcome late in the game was the date change from the 15th to the 22nd. The date, of course, is very important to this fight because of Tank Davis's legal situation. If you're not following closely, he pleaded guilty in a criminal case to 4 counts in a hit and run charges that he faced. And so he's being sentenced on May 5th. And obviously, if he wants to be involved in a big time boxing match, he has to fight before May 5th because there's a very strong likelihood that he's going to be incarcerated for a period of time. And so there would be no way to do the fight, in the later spring or in the summer. So getting it done in April became very critical. And apparently that's what's going to happen. And, putting all that stuff aside, in terms of just the pure competition, it should be one hell of a fight. These are exciting fighters. These are guys that have somewhat different styles, but they both can punch. They both are fast. They both are experienced. It's an A+ kind of matchup. I'm totally psyched for it.
What do you know about the ins and outs of this fight? I've read reports. Is it 136 pounds catch weight? Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. That's what they've said since the beginning when all this started. I mean, I go all the way back to when there was an announcement that was premature, but in November, they were saying 136 pounds, which is one over the lightweight limit. Now, of course, Tank Davis holds the WBA's regular title in the lightweight division, but he has fought one fight in the 140-pound division when he had the victory against Mario Barrios. Ryan Garcia has been a career-long lightweight. The last couple of fights he's had have been in the junior welterweight division. He moved up the first time to junior welterweight as an accommodation because his opponent was having trouble with the weight, and rather than have the fight be scratched, he elected to give in and go up a few pounds to do the fight. And he's comfortable there. And I guess they agreed to do it a little over the limit. I never really quite understood why they did it at 136 as opposed to either 135 for Tank's belt, secondary as it may be, or 37, 38, 39, whatever. But the bottom line is it's a non-title fight, technically a welterweight junior welterweight fight. And it'll be whether there's a belt at stake or it's 135 pounds or 137 pounds, whatever. Nobody cares. They want to see these two, young stars in the ring, seeing who's the best that night.
What do you know in terms of the broadcasting? Because that was obviously one of the hurdles that had to be faced. How will people be able to view it, essentially?
Well, that was one of the hurdles that actually was overcome a while ago. That was not necessarily the thing that was holding it up in the later stages of this agreement. But, obviously Tank Davis has been fighting regularly on Showtime for the last number of years, and several fights. He's done several pay-per-views with Showtime, including the fight that he had on January 7th when he knocked out Hector Luis Garcia. So he obviously is tied to Showtime. And in the case of Ryan Garcia, he is promoted by Golden Boy, which has an exclusive deal with DAZN. And so now you can say, okay, how can they make this fight? Obviously, both companies, and I totally understand this, and I hope all boxing fans get this. I know that we all get pissed off when these fights don't happen, but the reality is if you owned a company and you'd spent millions and millions of dollars on a particular asset, and that asset now wanted to go do business with your arch rival, and you get nothing out of it, you probably wouldn't be too pleased. So they had to figure out a way to do it. Now, in the end, they worked it out, and Showtime is going to be the producer and distributor of this event. It will be a Showtime pay-per-view fight, at least here in the United States, which is where, the vast majority of the revenue will come from in terms of the broadcast. So then it came down to when they were dealing with all the other business they had to deal with, including a rematch clause that Tank Davis has, which, that's a whole separate story. You can have your opinions about whether there even should be a rematch clause, particularly in a non-title fight. In any event, Golden Boy's position was, look, we gave in on the first fight. You guys are getting the fight. If we're going to have a rematch, because that means Ryan Garcia on our side wins the fight, then of course we should be the ones to get something out of that victory. And they had to spend however long to argue back and forth about if they would agree to that. Ultimately, Golden Boy, if Ryan Garcia is the winner and there's a rematch, they'll be the ones that go with DAZN for the rematch. But when you're doing these complicated contracts, they're always related to not just the fight at hand, but if there's the possibility of a sequel, they got to take care of terms on that too. So you're really almost negotiating two fights at once, which makes it even more complicated.
You mentioned the complication there in terms of the hurdles that have to be overcome. Are you surprised that it's finally got signed, or are you perhaps conscious that both men are not in the ring yet and anything can happen at this stage?
I mean, once it got to a certain point, it didn't surprise me that they finally got it done, but it was, you never know. These things hang in the balance. To me, it's not a matter of, is it 95% done? Is it 98% done? Is it 99% done? It's either done or it's not done. It's kind of like you can't be a little pregnant. You either have a signed contract or you don't. And until there is an agreement in place and both sides sign off on it, you've got nothing. And so whether it was one issue that was remaining or 50 issues that were left, you got to check them off the list and take care of all of them. And now with this fight, that appears to all be set. And, I'm excited for the fight. And I think every boxing fan should be. I know it was hard to get there, but these are prime guys. These are not guys in their mid 30s or at their late 30s or at the end of their careers. These guys are in their prime. These guys are at their, at the peak of their powers, both in terms of where they are physically as well as where they are in terms of their, their existing star power. It's just a great matchup.
That was always one of the worries, wasn't it? Time and time again, when boxers end up facing each other later down the road, and you always think, well, if both were within their prime, how would it really have gone? So I think a lot of people were thinking that this would have been the same thing, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, obviously these guys are both in their 20s. I mean, Tank Davis is 28 years old. Ryan Garcia is 24 years old. This is when they should be fighting each other. And by the way, if it turns out to be an exciting, really good fight, and whatever happens, it would be the kind of fight where you wouldn't necessarily need there to be a contract to tell you there's going to be a rematch. It would be organic. Fans would demand it. And that would mean that the fighters, if they went and did a rematch, theoretically would be able to make the most money by giving the rematch. Think back to all the huge mega fights that we've seen in the past. Not all of them, many of them didn't have rematch clauses. There was no rematch clause when Muhammad Ali fought Joe Frazier. There's no rematch clause, in any of the biggest fights of all time. That's unfortunately part of the business today. And I'm just glad that they were able to do this at a period in their careers. And you got to credit the fighters, because if they didn't want the fight, there wouldn't be a fight, because they could easily go and do other events, no problem. But their competitors, they're going to make their best money they've ever made for this fight. So that's obviously a big inducement to getting it on. And I hope that other fighters that are in this type of situation, who are maybe, in their 20s, who are by no means done, not past their prime, even if they're undefeated or have a loss or two, whatever, make the biggest fight possible when you can. And if you lose, your career's not over by any stretch. The guy listen, I don't want to hear anybody come back on April 23rd, whoever's the loser of this fight, and say, oh, they're garbage, they're finished, they suck, whatever. No, they are going to go in the ring against another top guy. They're going to give their best effort. Whoever wins, great. Whoever loses, I'm not going to kick dirt on them. I'm going to say, thank you for taking the fight. Dust yourself off, and I hope to see you back in another big one.
Who do you think's favorite coming into this fight?
It's a good question. I can see reasons for both. I think probably probably Tank Davis will be at least a slight favorite. He's fought a little bit better opposition probably overall. He's had a bigger audience for a recent fight, so he's more known, I guess, to the public, as popular as Garcia is. They both are fast. I think Ryan probably has got better foot speed, better hand speed. For one punch power, they both can punch. Ryan's got a dynamite left hook. Tank can punch also to the head and to the body. Listen, the fight's, still a couple of months away. There's plenty of time to get down into the nitty gritty and break down, each thing on your boxing checklist of who has the advantages, to think about who you think will win, how it's going to go. I'm not ready to necessarily, the funny thing is, as long as this fight's sort of been in the offing and we've thought it might happen, I've never really spent a lot of time thinking about if they actually make it, who do I think is going to win and how? So now that it's here and it's now I got to start thinking about that, how I want to break it down.
Yeah, I wasn't asking for sort of a prediction. I just thought in terms of bookies' favourite and public opinion, who would you think that people would sort of go by? But how much in terms of media coverage are we expecting? Do you think from now until the fight? Is there going to be, multiple press conferences and sort of tours, or is it going? Yeah, how can you sort of see it coming from now until fight night?
I mean, I'm sure that there'll be at least one press conference because for a fight of this magnitude, you have to have the two guys standing there looking each other in the eye and get that, get that photo that can go get beamed all over the place, whether it's on television or on, Facebook or whatever other social media or on your phone. I mean, you got to have them size each other up. So I'm sure they'll have at least one press conference, in, New York or Los Angeles. I would imagine Los Angeles. I don't think there's enough time with only 7 weeks or 8 weeks, I guess, to do multiple press conferences. These guys are in camp now. I mean, ideally, the thing would have been done, a month and a half ago, and they would already had a couple of press conferences. That didn't happen. Fair enough. But look, there'll be a big media turnout for this for a couple of reasons. Number one, Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia, their popularity is what it is, but they're popular within a different group of fans. Ryan is, very popular on the West Coast, Los Angeles, a lot of Latinos, obviously a lot of young girls, just a different kind of fan base. He's got all those millions and millions of followers on social media. Tank is a very appealing fighter to a lot of East Coast boxing fans, being from Baltimore, has fought, sold out in that area, sold out in Washington, D.C., sold out in Atlanta, obviously appeals to the Black community in a heavy way. And so they draw from different fan bases. So those medias that cover those areas, that's going to make it a big fight. Within boxing, it's obviously one of the big fights. We've been starving for a major fight. I mean, there's a lot of good fights on the schedule, and we've seen a bunch of them in the last several weeks, but there hasn't been like the big pay-per-view, the big event. And this is in this moment, in this first half of 2023, this is that fight right now, because a lot of the other big fights aren't done yet. We haven't seen a Spence and a Crawford fight get made. We're still waiting on Usyk and Fury to see if they can get their stuff wrapped up. We still haven't seen, any other big major fight. And even though a guy like Canelo, who's the undisputed champion and one of the best fighters out there and a huge star, he doesn't have that big mega fight right now because he's pretty much run through so many of the opponents. So for better or worse, Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia, that's a pretty big fight, as big as we can get right now in the sport.
How many pay-per-view buys do you expect for the US market for this to do?
That's a very good question.
If you want, or you can do US, up to you.
Well, I mean, listen, in the United States, pay-per-view is really difficult. I mean, that's just a fact, because for a million different reasons, and people measure it differently now. That a successful pay-per-view today has numbers that would be considered very, very poor, just 10 years ago, let's say. But I think that if they do a proper promotion and the guys participate and they do their appearances and do their interviews and make their do their get people a little spiced up at their news conferences and things like that, and you've got PBC doing their thing, you got Golden Boy doing their thing, and everybody gets out and beats the drum for it. You got two networks that'll be behind it to a degree with Showtime and DAZN. I think it would be a disappointment if it didn't do anything, at least 500,000 buys. Now I'm not going to sit here and say, I mean, there'll be outlandish predictions of, it's going to be over 1 million buys, and which that's fine. That's the promoter's job to like hype things up like that. I live in the real world and I understand how this works. And, 500,000 would be a pretty big, hefty number. Everybody make a lot of money in a fight like that. A lot of people will get to see it. And that 500,000 would be pirated, I'm sure. So the reality of terms of who's actually watching will be much greater. But those who will actually pay for it, I think if they did that number, would be considered a success.
It's got to make it a fantastic fight, maybe fight of the year, fight of the decade. A lot of great comments, a lot of adulation in terms of having this fight finally signed. A lot of people are saying this is the fight to save boxing. Did you agree with that sentiment, or is that just bull, Dan? Just a bit much?
I don't know. I've never heard anybody say that. Anybody is saying that, they should check themselves into like a mental health facility, because that is one of the stupidest things I ever heard. I mean, they wrote that shit about Mayweather versus Oscar. It was literally the cover of Sports Illustrated, back when Sports Illustrated actually mattered still in the United States in terms of a print publication. And they put a big picture of Oscar on the cover with Floyd Mayweather, and it was the fight to save boxing. And I've never seen such a bunch of nonsense in my life. Boxing doesn't need saving. boxing needs some reform. Boxing needs a few things to be tweaked and changed, obviously, but it doesn't need saving. As my dear friend Larry Merchant is fond of saying, boxing will never die, and you can never kill it either. So it's not the fight to save boxing. It's not a big enough fight, even if boxing needed saving. I don't want to downplay it. It's a great matchup, and it's a fight that I've anticipated for a while. But to call it the fight to save boxing is just pure stupidity.
It's a celebration for many reasons. You put a tweet out earlier on today. It's Floyd Mayweather's birthday.
Yes.
46 years of age. Aaron Chalmers on Saturday in the UK. Just an instant reaction to that fight. Is
my instant reaction is, who cares?
Yeah, well, I need to ask because I know Aaron Chalmers from reality TV in the UK, and getting going out in a place like Newcastle, and obviously MMA fighting. He's boxed a few times, and now gets the chance at probably one of the greatest boxers of all time. It's just a bit odd, Dan, isn't it?
I mean, listen, I wish Floyd happy birthday and all that, and Floyd and I are cool and everything, but if he wants to go make money doing exhibitions, more power to him. I have no quarrel. I'm not a hater on it. Go do your thing. I just don't have any personal, really too much interest in. I mean, I've written some stuff about his other exhibitions. I've watched some of his other exhibitions. To tell you the truth, I don't even know exactly how to get this exhibition, even if I wanted to buy it in the United States. I'd never heard of Aaron Chalmers ever until he was announced as Floyd's opponent. If he came to my house and rang my doorbell and I answered, I wouldn't know who the hell he is. Again, nothing against Aaron Chalmers, but he might as well be fighting you for all I know. I know you better than I know Aaron Chalmers. So I have no idea why anybody would actually pay for this. If they want to. I'm not one to tell somebody how to spend their money. Go do your thing. But I understood it at the beginning because it hadn't happened yet. Now Floyd's had I don't know, this is maybe like his 5th or 6th exhibition, I guess, or something like that since his retirement. I mean, to me, if you kind of seen one, you've seen them all. What's the allure? They don't actually fight. And again, I'm not knocking them. I'm not knocking the hustle. I mean, and Floyd, if he wants to get in the ring and move around and the fans want to come out and see him, that's cool and all. But from my point of view, maybe I'm just spoiled because I got to be ringside and watch Floyd Mayweather at the absolute peak of his career and cover 25 of his fights. So to me, I've seen Floyd in the gym spar that's going to be more competitive and more interesting than he will do in an exhibition match. I mean, so it doesn't really hold an allure for me. I just don't care about it at all.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, if you hadn't seen him in his prime, obviously where you're working and stuff, would you go and watch him at the weekend if you were able to from the UK? Would you go, or would you not be interested at all? Because it's like an exhibition, like you said, he's done previous exhibitions like this before.
I probably wouldn't. And I say that because, you know what? I'm going to spend my time this weekend. I'm going to watch the Showtime card with Subriel Matias against Jeremiah Ponce, which is for a proper world title, as the Brits would say. Got a good undercard. I'm going to spend my time watching Jake Paul and Tommy Fury, which is not maybe super high-level world championship boxing, but I'm interested at this stage of the game. There's got a world championship fight on that card. So, and that's a pay-per-view, so I'm not looking to buy 2 pay-per-views in the same weekend. So if I have to choose, I'm going to buy the Tommy Fury and Jake Paul pay-per-view over Mayweather, which I'm not even sure how to get the fight. They've done such a terrible job in marketing and in promoting it. And I tell you what, I keep my detailed schedule on my Fight Freaks Unite Substack newsletter, and I have the schedule plotted out, as far as I get in advance, and with bout sheets from different promoters and broadcasters and that sort of stuff. I've been asking for however long. I can't even find out how many rounds Mayweather and Aaron Chalmers is scheduled for. So, whatever. I mean, they can go do their thing. I don't, to me, it's not really boxing. It's entertainment, I guess, for some, but and Floyd's obviously is one of the all-time greatest fighters ever, but this is not boxing.
You mentioned it there, Tommy Fury, Jake Paul. I'm fortunate enough to be in Saudi for this event. Obviously, it's a bit different for me being here, but is there the similar hype that which we're experiencing at this event in Saudi? Are you seeing that in the States? It's hard to really recognize it when you're actually at the event.
I mean, there's some hype for it, and part of the reason for that is because in the United States, the broadcaster that has the U.S. rights to do the pay-per-view is ESPN. And ESPN, where I spent 15 years working and covering boxing, is the biggest sports outlet in the United States. And so when they speak, where they put an event or an athlete or whatever on front and center of their news programs or their talk shows or on the website and that type of thing, it does become something within our society. And so as we tape this on Friday in the late part of the day, this morning on ESPN's front page was a big story about Jake Paul and Tommy Fury. So from that standpoint, it's getting the attention, at least from ESPN, which does kind of filter out into the rest of the sporting world. But I can't say it's like this massively hyped event. I mean, there'll be people, it'll do some business. I mean, it is available not only on ESPN's, app, but you can buy it as a regular pay-per-view on your normal TV or whatever device you use. And they've been talking about it, and they had Jake Paul this week, do what in ESPN lingo is called a car wash, where he goes and does interviews with every single different show and talks to the different writers and does different radio stuff. I mean, they do a whole litany of appearances, and that gets the word out. And so, it'll do okay here. But it's not gonna. There'll be more hype for Davis and for Davis and Garcia, it seems to me, in this country.
I don't know what you've been able to see from over there, but in terms of the content that you have been able to view, who looks the most comfortable, do you think, from what you've seen in this fight?
I mean, I think they both look okay. I think neither guy is looks like, you've seen certain guys come to like a weigh-in or a press conference or even into the ring on the night of the fight, and they just look like out of sorts, petrified, or like just clearly one guy has the dominant position over them. In this particular case, I did see some of the news conference that they had. They both look confident to a degree. I don't really put a lot of stock in that necessarily. I think they're both excited for the fight. Look, how many guys can fight a 8-round cruiserweight non-title fight and get paid millions of dollars for it? I mean, as we've been talking about Mayweather, I remember many times one of the great quotes when he would talk about some of his big fights, and he's making $30 million and his opponent was making, $10 million, whatever the number was. Because when you're making that much money, there are no losers. And if Tommy Fury is making the reported $2 million and Jake Paul is guaranteed $3 million, there's no losers in that situation.
What do you make of the contract from yesterday's press conference? Winner takes all. Is that actually—
I don't make anything of it. That's bullshit. That's complete bullshit. And then no fighter should fight for winner take all. It's a blood sport, and if you're going to get hit and you're going to go in the ring, you should be paid as long as you give an effort. So I don't make anything of it. I mean, it's good for hype and good for people to maybe chat about. You're asking me about it, but at the end of the day, Tommy Fury is not fighting for free, and Jake Paul's not fighting for free. I guarantee you that.
Look, Tommy's the boxer, Jake Paul's the influencer, and obviously Jake Paul is now transitioning into the boxing world, but it seems that they see something in Tommy that makes them confident. Do you reckon is it Tommy's previous like the last 2 performances that they're looking at, do you reckon?
I mean, I'm sure they're just looking at the whole package. I'm sure they saw what Tommy looked like when he fought on Jake's undercard of one of the Woodley fights against a guy that was, I believe, 0-1 or something like that. And he looked absolutely terrible, even though he won the 4-round decision. I think they're confident in this, that even though Jake Paul has not fought, so-called boxers, even if you just look at the Woodley 2 fights and the Anderson Silva fight, and maybe even the Ben Askren fight, who was a combat sport athlete, even if he was an MMA fighter known as a wrestler as opposed to a puncher, the way that Silva and Woodley were, that I would think that at this stage that those are actually better opponents than anybody that Tommy has fought. Now, Tommy's 8-0, and he's a so-called, a real boxer, but his opponents have been horrible. His opponents have some of the worst records you'll ever see, 0-22 and 7-112 or whatever it was. Oh, just nobody that's even worth a damn. And so I'd be willing to put up money that Anderson Silva and Tyron Woodley and maybe even Ben Askren would beat every single guy that Tommy Fury ever faced. I'm not so sure Tommy Fury beats Anderson Silva or Tyron Woodley for that matter. You understand what I'm saying? Like, yeah, he's the real boxer in quote marks, but that doesn't mean that Jake has not fought guys who are at least above, by some margin, the dregs of the type of opponents that they have dug up for Tommy Fury. Now, that's not a knock on Tommy Fury. He's the fighter. He fights who his people put in front of him. But I think there might be a reason why they're putting that level of poor opponent. He fought one guy with like a good record in his whole career. That was the 6-rounder he had in April on Tyson's undercard against Dillian White. And that wasn't exactly a lights out performance either. So I've said steadfast, as I've talked about each and every one of Jake's recent fights, I'm a very strong believer in matchmaking. I'm sure the people that are responsible for Jake's career have done their homework and they picked Tommy for a reason. They think that he's got a good name. He does come with the credibility of being a so-called real boxer. He is the brother of the heavyweight champion. And if Jake takes care of business, it's going to make him look very good. And if he happens to lose Jake Paul, that's life. I mean, it's prize fighting. You got to always you're taking a risk no matter when you get in the ring.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that on Sunday. Before you go as well, we spoke about this when the news was announced many months ago in October, the Conor Benn and the VAR testing and all the rest of it. But the WBC ruling, what do you make of that, Dan? Are you satisfied with that, or what does it really, really mean in essence?
It doesn't really mean a lot. And I'm not knocking the WBC because they put out their ruling. They made an announcement of what their decision was, which was kind of weird. I mean, partly because it was related to their clean boxing program. It's not like Conor Benn was their, welterweight champion or something along those lines. So what they did was, because he was a part of the clean boxing program, and one of the failed tests that he had, now the one that everybody knew about that became very public was the one that was failed, that was under the VADA program that Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. had signed up for leading up to their fight. That's the one that caused the fight to be canceled. Now, I know others had been hearing for quite a while prior to that about this other so-called failed test. Now, I never wrote about it or spoke about it because I couldn't prove it. And I'm not one to go out there and say a guy failed the test if he didn't fail a test. But I had heard it. So when it did come out publicly that he had failed this clean boxing program test that was months before the drug test that he failed that caused the fight to be canceled, I wasn't surprised. So that's where the WBC's involvement comes in. So because he failed a test that was conducted under their clean boxing program, obviously they had to do their own due diligence, investigation, whatever. But in the end, their result was they went through their process. They obviously had conversations with the Benn team. They received this giant packet of their information of what they purported that happened. The whole thing with the egg thing came up, but that's a story for another day, I guess. But anyway, what you asked, what does it mean? Only thing it means is that the WBC now makes Conor eligible to return to the WBC rankings, which means that should the time come when he is in the ring fighting and they come to the WBC about the prospect of fighting for a world title or for a regional title, that he would be allowed to do so. But it doesn't change anything as relates to can he actually get in the ring and fight? Because, and I've tried to make this, and some boxing fans are stupid as rocks. Not all, some. And there's a faction, not most of people, but there's a loud faction that just don't understand this concept. The sanctioning bodies are responsible for rankings and sanctioning title bouts, rankings and title bouts. It's commissions, state commissions, national commissions like the British Board, tribal commissions like we have here in the United States, as well as state commissions. They're the ones that are responsible for overseeing licenses of fighters and medical examinations and things along those lines, of which is what allows guys to actually fight. So the WBC can tell you all day long that Conor Benn is free to fight for a WBC title and be in their rankings in the welterweight division, but it doesn't help him get a license. And as far as I can tell, based on the comments that the British Board made in their statement, they were sort of like, look, we respect the WBC, but it doesn't change anything as it relates to our investigation and what's going on here. And it may be a nuanced concept, but in the WBC's clean boxing program rulebook, they don't use anything related to strict liability. The British Board of Boxing Control does use strict liability. And to put it in a short nutshell, what strict liability means is whatever comes in your system is in your system, whatever it is and however it got there, you're responsible. So even if he didn't take it anything on purpose, he's still going to have to suffer the consequences unless he can prove otherwise. That's the bottom line. And so he's still not licensed in the UK. They could try to go elsewhere and maybe get a license. No guarantee that will happen. But for the time being, he's still on ice. Bottom line.
Dan, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining me in such short notice. We will put links to your work in our description. Any work you want to go to, Dan, please follow those links. But Dan, thank you so much. It's been too long since I've spoken to you, but enjoy the rest of your evening and we'll catch up soon.